Welcome to the Lost Signals Discusses Film and TV. Using the revolutionary Manzur-Ramosi Thurlow scale,
or MONS,
we scrupulously review these art forms with an emphasis on narrative structure. Join us for another entertaining episode.
Hello there, my friends, and welcome back to the Lost Signals Discusses Film and Television. I am your lieutenant for tonight, Scott Thurlow, and I'm here with my underlings, Private Corporal Chris Morgan.
War is stupid, and people are stupid.
Mm-hmm. And my correspondent, Jonathan Ian Manzer.
Sir, yes, sir.
And Saving Ryan Privates, Stephen Amosi.
War, what is it good for?
Yes, very nice. And as you possibly gathered, as we are still in Oscar season, we have just seen, about to review 1917. The movie set in World War I, if you're unfamiliar with that. And my logline is a simple reference. It's just the same old theme since 1917, with their tanks and their bombs and their guns, etc. So with that, while Chris settles down, he's going to tell us about the plot.
The plot is fairly simple. Two privates are sent off. Schofield and Blake are sent off to warn the battalion of 1,600 soldiers on the front lines to not engage the enemy because they're basically going to be walking into a trap.
It's a trap.
It's a trap. Yeah, God damn it. All right. But basically the movie catalogs their journey from let's just say, for lack of a better term, base camp to the front line. And on the way there, we lose Blake, and Schofield has to make it to the end, and he does. And it is, as the rest of this movie, bittersweet and horrific, and the devils are in the details, so we'll discuss it from there.
Just to be pedantic, though, they're not privates. They're
Lance corporals.
They're corporals. I'm sorry, I thought they were privates. I kept thinking of
You're going to bust yourself back down the private.
God damn it. Now I'm going to be like peeling potatoes in the...
You're not on the mission to deliver the important orders.
Now I'll just sit in the trenches.
Mm-hmm.
But the film is shot in... it's designed to be like one single shot.
As if it were a single...
Yeah, it is. It is virtual real time. And I mean...
So we harken back to Birdman.
We harken back to Birdman, but it was really effective. I'm just going to... We'll discuss it, so I'm just going to give my score. I'm going to give it a 3.
It's almost like a video game in certain ways.
We said that coming out of the film, yeah.
In that there are... one, because of the linear nature of the narrative, but also it's highlighting set pieces from World War One, which effective.
Yeah, they looked awesome. They were well done.
So the narrative, it's, as Chris explained, it's a very simple story. The mail must get through.
Neither tanks, nor bombs, nor guns.
Rain, nor sleet, nor snow, nor World War One stand in the way of the mail getting through. And it's effective. It just... Is it the highest quality narrative of all time? No, and that's what we rate our system on.
At least the Oscars, we have to rate that against, like, the
Scrutinize
best,
it a bit
narratives
more.
of all time.
Yes, because this is very much, almost certainly an Oscar lock for Best Pick.
Yeah.
And while this is very strong in style, I can't give style points to narrative points. So I think I'm going to give it a 2, not necessarily for fault of the movie. And would this movie have benefited from a greater narrative structure? Perhaps not, because that's not what they're going for here.
Yeah.
It's the showpiece, thematic, and stylistic aspects of World War One. But
because of that.
So I'm going to give it 2.
What do you think, Steve?
I have an interesting kind of take on that. I agree with you. It's a really simple plot. There's not a ton to it. It's like survive until you get there, basically. And that's what Schofield's trying to do throughout the movie. But I don't have any problems with the plot per se. It's just not insane. I might have given this a 3, but I do have something that is going to touch upon style as well, so I'm not going to really talk too much about it here.
To be continued in that question.
But it does affect the plot in my mind, and that's the reason I think I'm going to go with a 2 instead of a 3 on this. There is the in the back of my mind, and I want to be realistic. I want to be honest with you guys. There's in the back of my mind I like this movie quite a bit. I don't think I want to give it a 10, and this is perhaps the best place to take a point off because of the reasons I said. The plot isn't super. There's not a lot to grab onto. It's just go on the journey with these guys, and it does have a beginning, and middle, and a strong beginning, and middle, and end. But there is one thing that kind of takes away from how from this being a little bit better in that department, I think, which I'll talk about later, and I think I'm going to give it a 2 for those reasons.
Yeah, I mean, I largely agree. So I could have given this a 3, but I think it's simple and straightforward story, which is told well. But that's kind of I hate to say it, I don't mean to say it this way in sort of a backhanded phrase, but that's all it is. But because of that, it works really well. And you're right, when we get to style, I think we'll talk more about it. But as on paper, the story of these two corporals get, the orders must get through. Yeah, it's perfectly fine. It's very linear, as you said. So there's no convoluted time jumps, which is something we've come up recently in a couple of episodes. But yeah, I think I'm going to give it a very strong 2, just not quite enough for a 3. And I think that's a good point, Steve-O, that perhaps we should be scrutinizing at least Oscar films a bit more than we might normally. So I think very solid, strong 2, but just a little bit under a full score for a plot.
Yeah, I just want to say one last thing, because I was hemming and hawing on between a 2 or a 3, because there were certain times where I felt the Raiders' hand. I definitely felt up until Blake died, and he met the platoons going in there. That's where I felt a little lax. I started feeling the Raiders' hand more.
Yeah.
But maybe I'm going to come on the side of a softer 3. But the fact of the matter is, I kept hearkening back to the way we do things about, breaking immersion. How many times was the immersion broken? And the thing is, every time I'm like, is this the Raiders' hand? They would actually bring it back. And they actually could have really, and I'm sorry, Steve, I have to reference another film, but I was really afraid they could save, I was really...
Dock him a point.
Dock me a point. Give me a 2 for this review. But no, I really felt like they were going to go Saving Private Ryan on this. So maybe I'm giving them...
They share superficial similarities.
Yeah,
say,
but Saving Private Ryan definitely had the set piece, definitely had the... I didn't really like Saving Private Ryan, except for the first 25 minutes. I didn't, because I felt that it was, after that, it was just a showpiece. It was just
this was showpieces.
Yeah, but this one, I was never taken out of the character. This was why I believed the character. I mean, because at the end, when he's running there, he's basically been awake for most 24 hours, hasn't barely had any water, hasn't had any food, has been through a hell of a night.
His hand is definitely infected.
He's gonna lose his
shot.
He's definitely gonna lose his hand, if not his arm. Assuming he doesn't have blood poison, is gonna die. But the thing is, the protagonist I felt and carried with me, as opposed to a lot of war movies where a war movie is really easy to get model in and to really put the hero on a pedestal. And I think they balanced it really well. And maybe I'm giving it a 3 more because it exceeded my expectations and not disappointing me.
Sure.
I think those are all other points, though. That's both handling of the protagonist and handling of the themes. But I just, if you don't mind, I'd like to talk about plot armor for a second.
Yeah.
Because there's an initial section where they're storming the old trenches, not storming, they're infiltrating the old trenches of the Germans.
Try to get through the...
They think it might be populated. It's not. The Germans have tactically retreated from the location, and they come upon a tripwire. A rat sets off a tripwire. After that, I'm like, they both survived this. I'm like, they both have flowers. 2 guys going through World War I. They're not going to die.
Just 2
how
soldiers.
are they going to play? The entire thing is them playing off each other and having conversations. And then Blake dies. The scene after that. Yeah. I'm like, you subverted my expectations completely by killing off one of the main character up into that
ostensibly,
point.
Or what was set up to be. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
But afterwards, that guy has plot armor. I was not
for
worried at all about him not making it to the end of the Whereas Saving Private Ryan has such a cast to it of multiple characters that you don't know when one of them is going to die. And that's part of the chaos of war movies, is the feeling of uncertainty to who's going to make it to the end.
Yeah, Tom Hanks is probably the only one with plot armor in that movie. Like when you first watch it.
I basically
until the end. But like you could have
Spoilers.
seen, I could have seen this guy dying at the end of, Schofield. I could have seen dying at the end of this movie, and I wouldn't have been surprised. But I did want to touch on a couple things in the plot as we're talking about plot, just as we're going. I thought that what you just mentioned was really interesting when they go through the labyrinth of the German trenches and then set up the tripwire. Next scene, the plane. They watch a dogfight and the plane crashes like right at their feet. Basically, the guy gets stabbed by the German pilot after he gets out of the plane. When he goes to the city or the little town that's like on fire a little bit later. I just love that like progression of the horror of war, like ramping up,
it's like a video game,
ramping up as it goes.
But it worked well.
And then, and then they get to the actual final engagement where they're already half of the platoon or whatever has gone in, and he's just trying to stop more people from dying. It's just like a really interesting progression throughout this plot of like ramping up the carnage, but also like the stakes,
Sure.
And when he gets there a little bit too late, I thought that was a really interesting way to go about it.
And one thing I thought was interesting, and that was part of what I was glad that he showed up after the attack had already begun. But Beth brought up something, and I thought about it too.
I was really sad about that.
I
don't know why you're glad.
Because it's subverted.
Subversion, he's saying.
Again,
I get you.
I'm not really. See, this is one of the things is if I change my score to a 2 by the end of it, don't be surprised, because a lot of this film I knew there was plot armor. I could feel the writer's hand at some point, but they didn't go for the.
It wasn't like a paint by numbers.
It wasn't paint by numbers. But I also like the fact that the woman who had the baby, it wasn't her baby. She found him. And I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah.
There was that writer's hand of like he found the milk and got the milk, and of course he had the baby. Again, video game,
sure.
So I'm going to hold with the 3 for now, but I'm going to give it subject to change depending upon antagonist. I think is where it's going to lead to.
Sounds good. Well, tell us about the themes of 1917, both the year and the movie. Ian.
Well, the world is at war.
In a world at war.
And you know what?
War never changes.
This is a very show not tell thematic quality to it. It is basically the entire plot is to show you set pieces of things that occur during the war. And from what I understand, this is all based on, I guess, the grandfather of the director of stories from World War One. And it feels like a compilation of
like
highlights of the or lowlights of the war, if you will, of just to show, without trying to say a message here. It just
like this is what it was like. This is how it was. Yeah,
this is if you're horrified by this, be horrified by this. And it's not glamorizing, but it's not. It's just showing
it's not
as
unhopeful,
realistically as possible because it's a very simple story. It's delivering a piece of mail from A to B, hopefully in time
to prevent further unnecessary casualties. Sure.
Yeah, but also showing the again without trying to belabor a message or anything like that. It just shows you like here's what World War I was like.
It's like offhandedly the ravages of that war and war in general, specifically the trench warfare and like the methods they were using to fight each other and so forth. So I pretty much agree. Good, Chris.
One of the things, and this is going to go back to what I loved about this, and which is what I loved about things like Band of Brothers, is the mundanity of horror. It's not just the fact that the tripwire. It's the fact that you're crawling over dead bodies. You're seeing cows. Like one of the soldiers he runs into mentioned, they were talking about how the Germans shot cows just out of spite so they couldn't get meat or milk from them.
It's not a spite. It's a good tactic.
Well, yeah, it's a good tactic. But I'm saying is the mundane things that you don't think of that people do in these situations where like the one thing where he like put his hand through the chest of another person. I mean, it's just like there's bodies all over the place. I mean, in a lot of war movies, you don't see this thing. But when you're talking about, when you actually take the time to discover, well, how not having food, what weather's like, actually having bodies litter the fields, it's these basic mundane things you don't think about that are there.
Follow the smell of the dead horses.
Follow the smell of the dead horses.
There were several times where the camera lingered on a dead body trapped in the barbed wire.
Yeah.
And
Or like-
that was like,
Or like in rubble and stuff.
you know, that was really, you know, it was meant to impress upon you how like how horrible all this shit was, and like how hellish it was.
Yeah, there were other times though, Cookie, that like there was that, and there was also like, again, to me, offhandedly, where like just in the background you saw like, again, corpses piled up, or when he, like,
river clogged.
yeah,
with-
Yeah.
exactly.
And I was going to say,
With French citizens, right? Like
Yeah.
that was all the citizens of that town that he was just in.
So,
And
yeah, it was both like sometimes they lingered on it, sometimes it was just there in the background. If you blink or if you weren't looking at it, you might have missed it, but it was still there. It was like authentically, included, if you will.
and a nice horrific touch, and it is horrific touch, is that when he has to crawl over the bodies getting out of the river, as you just mentioned, Ian, they're bloated. As dead bodies are. But I mean, the thing is, you can see.
One guy's tongue.
Oh my God, it was horrific. I mean, what I'm saying is, it's like, yeah, and a lot of this is moving on style, but I'm just like saying that they did a really good job with the details. Again, show,
Yeah.
not tell.
Well said. So is that going to be one's?
Hearts of War, and the I want to just mention like like including the Hearts of War, like having to like move past the death of a friend without really thinking about it. Like there's time to think about that later, basically.
Even
That
the
type of
captain
thing.
that he runs into says it. He's like, I know it's hard
Best
for your
not
son,
to dwell
but
on it. Yeah. So like I think that's a very important main theme of this. Actually, is like, and I think the reason that his friend, I don't know how based on a true story this is, but like I think the reason that his friend dies in the middle of the movie, the guy who ostensibly is the main character up until that point dies in the middle of the movie, is to show like no one in this war is safe, and like that's the entire, like if you talk to, or if you like read texts about World War I or people's experiences, that's one of the things. Like this is the first time that like being good doesn't save you from anything. And like like even if you're the best soldier in the world, it doesn't make your chances of surviving any better.
Sure.
And I think that's
Absolutely.
a really fascinating thing that they showed and didn't talk about, but definitely showed.
but was certainly included. Yeah, man.
So a strong one for me.
And one other nice touch they had was the different reactions, because I loved it when the first platoon was running out there and you had the one captain who was crying hysterically.
Yeah.
And then when you meet McAllister, is that who is trying to, the general? Benedict Cumberbatch.
No,
When
he's
he-
Major McKay or something.
Major, yeah. He was like, he was
Colonel
angry. He wasn't
Mackenzie.
he was being a dick, but he was angry because he's like, "These are great orders, but next week they're going to have us do something else."
Yeah.
Yeah, that's.
I mean, so you had
Didn't
these
include them.
things, and you didn't see him as like this dickish Patton kind of person. It was just kind of like, I'm in the fucking front lines, and you keep giving me mixed messages. It's frustration. It's anger.
because that's war.
Yeah, and then you have a guy, a captain, sending his men out to die, and he's hysterically crying. He can't even answer it.
There's a early on, you meet another captain who tells him about this major, saying that, oh, he's like a glory hound. He might even like ignore your.
He said some
message.
men just live for the fight anyways, no matter what.
That turns out to be a red herring of sorts, or kind of this building expectations for what doesn't turn out to be.
Yeah, another nice subversion.
I like to think that he didn't actually know him. He
His
just
reputation.
either reputation or just he knows that sometimes people will ignore those things and say that they never got them or whatever. Have a witness is what he said. Like always have a witness when you deliver something like that.
Yep.
I think that's really interesting. But yeah, I agree.
So it's ones all around for themes, looks like. All right. And Steve-O, why don't you go on with antagonist? War.
Yeah, war. War never changes. It's always
Humanity
fucking horrible.
engaging in wars.
But this was it's interesting. Like looking at the First World War, and I wish that the amount of war movies
The ratio.
was more
Yeah.
loaded towards World War One, which is would give people like obviously the reason that it's loaded toward World War Two is because we had a modicum of like glory in that war, and that is something that you can use to like say rah rah USA or whatever.
No one's looking fondly back on World
Right,
War I.
World War One, everybody fucking hated it because it was fucking hell on earth.
Everyone agrees it was messy.
And nobody was fighting against an enemy that they really, really fucking hated. Like there wasn't like the quote unquote like true evil to fight against. It was just people fighting for their countries, and things got really bad, for lack of a better term. And this is like the first time that they're using modern weaponry and this fucking trench warfare.
Well, they're doing both, right? Like you got people on horses, and there's also tanks.
Well, exactly.
Theoretically, Civil War might have been arguably the first trench warfare.
Yeah,
it was, but nowhere near the.
Well, this is where war changed, because you had air combat, you had chemical weapons.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a really miserable.
And that's the other thing. It's just like both sides throwing literally everything they have at the other side, and like, you know, not only that, but the combatants, the actual grunts of soldiers that are on the front lines, like basically looking each other in the eye from fucking 50 yards away, and like, you know, if you fucking put your head up above that line, it'll get blown off. Like, it's just really, really, you're like everybody there seeing horrific shit, and like every story you hear about it about World War I is like, this is fucking bad, man. Like, this was just really, really fucked up an entire generation of men in Europe, and yeah, I mean, that is the antagonist for sure, and it's always going to be an effective one.
I mean, it's sort of like not the same, but it's a show don't tell antagonist, as you said. I think they did that very well. Like, it's obviously that there's no, I don't think you can make an argument that for anything else, but the way it's integrated, I think, is very impressive and really well done, and maybe bleed over as well into style, as we've already alluded to, but certainly I think that is the main antagonist, and it is portrayed / like drop as a backdrop and surrounds all the action, everything that's happening.
Yeah. One's all right?
Yeah.
Anyone else to add anything to antagonist to war? All right, then. Well, that will bring me to protagonist, or it's, so like you said, like you guys mentioned, I do like the slow roll where it's Schofield and Blake, and you think Blake is certainly set up to be like the more, like the stronger character, or the one who's going to take lead, and then about a third of the film or even less through, you're like, well, all bets are off because he just got stabbed to death, and now it's Schofield. So because of that, I would say it's like 80% Schofield. George McKay is the actor who plays him, and I'll give out Dean Charles Chapman played Blake. And yeah, I think they were quite good. Like, again, you think it's like a buddy movie. These two guys, they're going to make it no matter what. Like, they'll scrape through. Like, like slow roll again. Right? Subversion. So,
Rando stabbed for being a nice guy.
yeah. Like, when you mentioned the plane crashes, German plane crashes, after they watch the dogfight near their barn that they're sheltering in, and they, in fact, drag the German soldier out and are, like, trying to help him. Blake, in fact, is like, get this guy some water. And as, like, seconds after he says that, he's getting stabbed by the guy, and that is the fatal wound, and then he's dead for the rest of the film. So yeah, I think the subversion was great. Schofield then, of course, has to carry it, and as you mentioned, he of course has plot armor for the most part. But I actually thought, so about 80% through the plot, he makes it to the forest where the battalion is there, and they're like the last, they're like D company or whatever, like we're the fourth in line, like we're moving up to the trenches now, and they're like getting ready to move out, and he like slumps against a tree, and it's almost as if again he's gonna like expire there. Now, he doesn't.
I thought he was dead.
But I would have been okay if they did that in the film. So I just want to throw that out there. But all that to say, I think he did a great job. He basically had to carry it for the most part. It's him playing off like the other soldiers and stuff that he meets. He like crosses paths or joins up with a different company who's like doing some other mission, and they take him like so far up the road or whatever, and then he has to get out. He's like, well, my mission takes me this way. They're like, good luck. So yeah, I think he did a good job. He was sort of like not low key, but like subtly played. Mm-hmm. It was very believable, and it wasn't like forced. It wasn't inorganic or anything. And while when it was both of them, I think they had some good chemistry there until he has to, there's a nice like a bittersweet goodbye that he says, another good slow roll or subversion when Blake is like, I'm going to be okay, or like, is bad, or am I going to die? And Schofield's like, you might, in most other war movies, be like, no, you'll be okay. It's okay what you're making. He's like, I think you're going to die.
Yeah. He was like, yeah, bad. You're going to die.
So yeah, I think I'll give him mostly Sheffield protagonist credit, but even when Blake was there, I think he did a good job, both actors. So I'm giving a pretty damn solid 1. And with that, you guys can say anything else that I didn't.
I also like the show don't tell quality of that, because he says that I have nothing good to go back home to. Mm-hmm. At the end, you see the photo of, I assume his wife and kid, with come home, or whatever thing that said it did.
Come home to me, I believe it was,
and he has almost the Apocalypse Now mentality of, I can't go home again. I'm stuck in
Yeah.
the war mindset. I can't return there.
And he even
Shell
actually
shocked,
says
as
that.
they called it back in the day.
Yeah.
But he actually says at one point he hated going home because he knew he was going to come back.
Well, that's I don't know. Like I see what you mean, but I don't know if I look at it in exactly that way. I think he hated going home because he knew he had to come back.
Well, that's the whole thing.
It was like I didn't want to get a taste of home because it makes it so much harder to come back to this.
But then at
Hell.
that time, you hate the things you love because they're a reminder of what you're going to miss because you have to go back.
Right, but once and I mean, like theoretically,
But you're saying he didn't go full on Willard. Is what you're.
the other thing is like theoretically at the end of this movie, he still has to fight the fucking war. This is like in the middle of World War One, so like it's not like he's going home after
He has
this.
gangrene or something.
He's going to lose his arm.
Oh, yeah,
or-
That arm's coming off.
That arm's coming
Okay,
off.
What you do? Yeah.
But yeah, he certainly he cut his hand on barbed wire and then stuck it into a dead body that's been dead and bloated.
Accidentally. Yeah.
I'm not saying he did it on purpose. I'm just saying it happened.
Sure.
But yeah, I agree. I think he did a great. I think the actor George McKay did a great job. I think that it was Dean Charles Chapman as Blake as
Lieutenant Blake the younger.
Lance Corporal Blake also did a really good job. And I would say that until he dies, he shares. In fact, is even the main protagonist.
Yeah,
of
the
this
movie sets it up for Blake to be
yeah,
like the
exactly.
number
That's-
one, and Sheffield is like a sidekick almost.
So I think it's a good move to make the surprising move of killing that character off, and I think it works really well.
Yep.
So in terms of both of them, I thought they did a great job. You guys have said a lot about it already. I'm just gonna give it a 1.
Right. You guys too. E, Chris,
Mhm.
ones.
Yep.
All right. Let's move along, Chris, to secondary / supporting characters.
Secondary characters, basically anybody who's not Schofield or Blake.
Every
is a-
other soldier, whether
is-
German or English, they come across, and civilian.
Yeah, and I touched upon this before with the Crying Captain, and when we finally get to
Colonel Benedict Cumberbatch.
Colonel-
I'm just going to call him
Colonel Sherlock.
Yes.
Mackenzie is
We
Nope. Sorry, Steve-O. Colonel Sherlock from now on.
Colonel Sherlock,
Right.
and then
Moriarty.
Yeah.
Lieutenant Moriarty.
Yep.
But I think the important things about the supporting characters are the different perspectives it gives you, the bureaucratic mentality even in the trenches, and all the little things. Like I said, that's a really important point when the one commander says, "Make sure you have a witness with you."
That's a nice touch.
Because it is. Because there's no matter what, the human capacity for the bureaucratic mentality is just astounding. And it's just like it loans all these little supporting characters give little flavors, little textures to little different
Yes, I
perspectives.
think that's spot on, yeah.
And he's out there all by himself, and he has two things in mind. He's got to save as many of these 1,600 people as possible, and hope
And survive.
that Blake's brother's alive so he can pass along his message.
Yeah.
Everything else is there, and like I said, it would have been really easy. The whole the woman with the baby, that being her baby, and that getting, basically he dumps his food, and it's not her baby, and it's there was that, and it's just it shows. Like I said, I'm going to give the supporting characters a 1 because they all contributed something I felt that was important for the character, that was important for the narrative, and that actually went into the theme too.
Yeah.
There's
Good
not.
call.
I was gonna say there's not a ton of supporting characters. They all do a really good job. I think that the French woman that you mentioned, I think her name is Lori, does a really good job of just her role, and everybody fills their own little role.
Yes.
Lieutenant Moriarty, as you guys mentioned, the guy played by
Andrew Scott.
Andrew Scott is really good. And there's the other great little roles here and there. Colin Firth is in this as well as a general.
I'm surprised
as
they
the
didn't have
general,
Mike Myers show up and do it
as a general.
Oh,
a
Christ.
Bastards thing.
That would have, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think that everybody does a solid job in their roles, and they fill out the world.
Yes.
Because without them, it's just a dude in the darkness, and I think that all that's really well done.
What I found very interesting was one of the soldiers, I believe was Indian. And
Yes.
To
Wait for you
kinda
to mention that.
give him, without overdoing it, just kind of appearing there, it's a nod to the soldiers from the British colony at that time.
Yep.
Coming over and fighting in that, and something that you rarely
don't
see
think
World
about
War
that,
One films, let alone seeing the forgotten fighters in World War
Yeah.
One.
Yeah.
I think you said it pretty well, Chris. I might rephrase, like, they all create sort of a mosaic of, like, what's happening in World War One, and the various different sort of faces, I guess you'll see, whether, again, military personnel or civilians, and just people caught in the crossfire, and even the like German soldiers, the enemies that he like has little like gunfights with, like in the streets and stuff. I think all of them add to create a very, very nice sort of surrounding Sheffield story. So I think that's one's all around yes for secondary, my friends. All right, E. This one I'm wondering about, but why don't you tell us about the dialogue?
Well, the dialogue between
Sheffield.
Blake and Sheffield is
I think it's Schofield.
Schofield,
yeah. Sure. Sorry, what did I say?
Sheffield.
Sheffield.
Was okay at the beginning. I mean, like they fleshed out.
They had a
the character.
camaraderie there, yeah.
Overall, though, it's a lot of times people are talking who can't speak the other language. I mean, he's talking with a French girl. She speaks a little bit of English. He speaks a little bit of French. They try to communicate there. But I don't know. I'm going to pass.
All right. Allow me to jump in. I'll propose this to you guys. It was very matter of fact. Like, it was the stuff, I say this a lot, but perhaps even more so in this film. It wasn't bad, but it was like things that they had to say just to carry the action along, right? So, like, you're not having like Sorkin-esque dialogue or anything like that, right? You're not having Tarantino like back and forths. It's like, soldier, get to the lines. And, like, it's very simple and straightforward, a la the plot itself. Now, that doesn't make it terrible, but at the same time, I have a big old question mark for this one in my score.
All right.
Because of that. So that's how I'm coming down. Maybe like if that helps you out, or it's kind of what you're perhaps saying. But
so you have to look at like the scenes like where he's in the truck with a bunch of the other soldiers.
Right.
I know there's dialogue there. I don't remember really what.
Yeah, it was a fine scene.
What the highlight of it was.
It's a bunch of soldiers bullshitting.
I mean, no, the highlight of that is when they're making fun of their commanding officer, which I really enjoyed. You know what? I really enjoyed the dialogue of this, so I'm going to make the case for it.
Okay.
And we'll see what you guys think about
right. Do it
case. I think that there's a lot of the point of this is like there's not a lot of time to talk in the middle of World War One, right? Like that's the reason that the dialogue is so clipped and things like that, which I actually like but that may be more of style. But in terms of the dialogue that happens, I found Blake to be pretty funny. Like everybody had
a personality.
Everybody had their like personality that came through dialogue. I thought Blake was pretty funny. Schofield was very pessimistic.
He was dry.
Based on, like, you got that out of him based on his previous experiences that you don't really ever hear about, but you kind of know that he went through some shit based on his dialogue. The dialogue with the French woman, you got a lot from that. We've already spoken about a line of dialogue several times in this episode where the guy tells him to get a witness. I think that's a brilliant line. So I think there's a lot of like really interesting dialogue here that really adds to the movie, and I know it's sparse at times because there's a lot of this is. I remember like watching it. I was like 20 minutes of the movie. I was like, they haven't said shit to each other at this point, so they're just like walking through trenches for the first 20 minutes of the movie. But it makes all the other lines of dialogue more important, and not a single one of them fell flat in any way. And in fact, I think I remember the feeling of a lot of those lines. I remember the feeling of a lot of times when they were delivering dialogue pretty impressively. So I'm going to give dialogue a pretty strong one.
Okay. What do you think, Chris?
I agree with Steve. For me, dialogue has to be natural, number one. And
I'm not saying it wasn't.
No, hold on a second.
Yeah.
And to Steve-O's point is we've already pointed out certain lines that added to it. I mean, to me, for dialogue, if dialogue is just awful or takes it out or doesn't seem natural, I'm going to give it a 0. And sometimes, you do have people who are known for their dialogue like Tarantino or Smith. And it's just like, all right, enough. You're kind of parodying yourself. No. My whole point is dialogue should add to the flavor of the movie, whatever the flavor is, not to put quips there when they don't need to be, but there are some films that we've seen that just have like horrendous dialogue. They have these lines that are just like, who wrote this thing?
Sure.
But to me, but I think that Steve-O said the strongest thing is that the fact that we've quoted certain lines, or at least the intent of certain dialogue that added to it, is worthy of a 1 in my point.
I'm still not sure. Like, yes, you brought up like the same 3 or 4 lines, but those are like the peaks and what I feel like, if you will, in the trenches of the rest of it. And maybe I'll say it this way, because we're doing an Oscar-ish film, an Oscar like caliber film in theory, that I think I'm going to judge it a bit more harshly and just give it a soft 0, but maybe a 0 at the end of the day. I think just the way I'm coming down on it, the way I view it.
I'm more on your side, Scott, and I'm going to give it a 0 for the approaching maudlin death of Blake. But overall, I don't think that it was outstanding at all. So
yeah, maybe it's not like the focus of it, but I'm coming that way. So I think we're going to split the difference, 2 zeros and 2 ones there. And we'll go on to, this is probably the best one, or the most interesting one to highlight, Steve-O, the style.
Yeah, so interesting that I got this one. I really enjoyed the style of this movie. There are some fascinating shots that are gotten on this, like, one shot.
Very
movie.
Cleverly made to look like
Obviously, there are cuts in the movie in the same way that they did Birdman. There's like darkness and then it's another cut. But like, it's supposed to look like it's all taken in one shot. Yeah. And it's really well done. It's a really, really impressively directed and shot movie. Sam
Mendes,
that said, and I would like to give credit to the score as well. I think that it's a really well done score. That said, I think that there are times where, as much as I'm impressed with that they pulled off this thing, it's a gimmick in the same way it was a gimmick when Birdman did it. And there are times where the gimmick
wore thin,
but prevents the scene from being as impressive as it could be. And especially like when it gets more surreal, like the more surreal moments, like when he's standing in the middle of like a burning, in like front of a burning church, and there's this giant scene. And I think that like is an amazing shot that they got from that. But like, how much better could it have been if they were able to pull the camera off the rails and like actually get the shot?
I kind of see what you mean.
Like it really deserves, like, or if you could go back and forth between, if you could cut back and forth between the faces of people at certain points. I think that, don't get me wrong, I think that it's really impressive that they pulled it off. It's and for what it was, for the way that they did the movie, it was really good. But I just think that there were better, more impactful shots and scenes to be had at certain points in the movie than what they were able to get with what they were doing with the movie.
All right, so
I'm going to give it a 1 for sure, but I did want to like point that out.
All right, Goody.
I want to point out a different critique of that. I was paying attention to when the cuts were happening because instead of paying attention to the movie,
I'm playing the game of like, I wonder if I can spot the cuts.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And that starts distracting me from the movie as a whole. But overall, especially, I have to give it a 1 for the opening scene. That shot through the trenches was absolutely spectacular.
Yeah.
And I believe they pulled off a very long time without a cut in that scene. I actually tried looking up how many cuts they had completely in that. These are very, very, very interesting. Because I looked up when Birdman did it as well. And I saw a video also when they made all the cuts.
Where the cuts were, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, stylistically though, it is slightly gimmicky, but it works, and I think it's accomplishing what you want to do with all of that. We've already talked about the set design of the bodies strewn across landscape, whether it's bugs on a horse's corpse or
the rats and stuff everywhere.
Or rats. It's brilliant. Like, it's a visceral experience which should be seen in a movie theater.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have much more to add. I think it's very impressive. It's probably the most standout thing. Like, it's not that I disagree with you calling it a gimmick, but it feels like an insult to call it that. But certainly it was like, shot and done with that in mind. So therefore, like, yeah, you might, like, being us, you might play that game yourself, like, ooh, wonder if I can see when they, like, the actual cuts were versus, like, the way, like, the continuous nature of it. But certainly I think you mentioned, like, all of it is, like, set piece A and then set piece B, and but all of them individually, I think, were really well done, looked awesome. You're right that it's much more of a better experience seeing it, on big screen in theater. And one of you mentioned the soundtrack. I want to also add sound design itself, like for example, like a la Dunkirk, almost like the bombs and the shit. Like it was just right there. You felt as if you were with Sheffield or Schofield in the trenches or in the church, the bombed out village, and all that. So yeah, I think style for me is probably the most impressive part of this film, and like certainly like that was sort of going into it. We knew like that was the big draw, the big appeal. So with that, what do you think, Chris?
I'm gonna give it a 1, and it took me a few minutes to realize like, wait, they haven't had a cut in here. Just the opening scene, it was just like it took a while before I'm like, holy fuck. And I
didn't realize that was the.
I didn't realize they were going to do like a Birdman thing. But the thing is, to me, in Birdman, and I loved Birdman. I mean, it would definitely go in one of my memorable films of the decade. But I felt like it actually served a purpose here for you to follow it, for you to, if you can, to actually be able to follow these people. And I thought it was quite effective. And to your point, Steve, what you found, I found that really frustrating. Like I wanted to see the bigger cathedral on fire, but to me, I was frustrated, but I appreciated it at the same time because we had this first person narrative. Because of the cut, it kind of gave the virtual first person narrative because, you are following him for the most part. It's everything surrounding him. So I think the frustration of not being able to see what's beyond his point of view added to the flavor of it. And I did appreciate it. And I agree with you. I love the soundtrack and I agree with you, Scott. I love the sound design, the style of this film. For any minor critiques I might have, and I think was really strong and really did keep you there. So
I do want to mention a couple other things. When I said that, when I gave a point off on the plot and I said this is something that will come up later, what I meant was what I just said about the style.
Great, I got you.
And it kind of affecting the way that the plot is told. But I also want to mention, and this has come up like a couple of times. We didn't talk about this. I mean, maybe you guys did, but we didn't talk about this before the podcast or anything. But you guys mentioned that it felt like, or we've made video game references a couple times. And like while I was watching this, I was like, this feels like a video game. Like we're just going from like, it's almost like a first person shooter or something, or like a third person shooter. We're like going from point A. All right, now the next mission is to get to this point, and now the next mission is to get to here. It felt like a mix between like Call of Duty and I don't know.
When he was going through the city, the bombed out and on fire city, I'm like, 4 stealth sections.
Yeah, exactly.
That's funny.
Exactly. Like run away. You don't have your gun. Run away or whatever.
Well, I was gonna say the biggest video game moment for me was the milk. Because like you got the milk from that was the biggest.
Well, I didn't mention this, but since you did just now, it's almost like Hardcore Henry, but better in World War One.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's ones all around for style and
World War One.
First person.
Ooh.
Yeah, I feel like somebody's
that should be the next World War One film that they make. But no, so is that anything else to add on style?
No.
All right. Well, that'll bring me to recommendation. And yes, effing A. I do recommend 1917. Again, like I don't want to say it'd be nice, but it's cool to see that World War One is being covered versus, like you said, there's so much more World War II material out there, films and so forth. That it's more interesting, not more, but a very interesting time period that isn't explored as much. You don't see it used as much of a setting to tell stories in and to explore like the facets of war that we just talked out. And yeah, it's visually impressive, well acted. There's many things that are good about it. Sam Mendes is a great director. He's directed a lot of awesome stuff before this. And it's an Oscar-worthy film. It's very much in the running.
Golden Globes.
Yeah, exactly. It recently won the Golden Globes as a week or two ago at the time of this recording. So yeah, I'm giving 1917 a pretty damn strong recommendation.
Yeah, I agree. If you get a chance, definitely go see this in the movie theater. It's definitely worth it. I am going to say I loathe award shows, big award shows, but I'm going to say if there is any benefit to it is that this is a film that could have easily flown under the radar. I keep wondering if it was post-production that kept it from being released this late in the year, late in 2019. We're obviously watching 2020. because they wanted to get it for award consideration, or if this film was ready over the summer, because the summer did give, me Midsummer. But films like this, big films like this, how can I say this? Films like this are sometimes given this grandiose
treatment.
Like, and and I think World War I is definitely an important war in that warfare did change. And once again, I thought it was like I think I said this before with Wonder Woman, it's important because World War I does always get overlooked because you have the Civil War, which is obviously the war where most Americans died, and World War II because of all the major things there. But World War I is where warfare changed. And I really think this film deserves a lot of, I think people should see it because it really does its job very well. It's not a perfect movie. It's not a flawless movie, but I think
it's a high caliber film.
But it's a high caliber film.
I agree.
Yes, I recommend it. But I also recommend Valiant Hearts. There's a video game.
Please play Valiant Hearts.
True.
Yeah.
Get them both.
It's a World War I game.
See this film and then go play and buy Valiant Hearts.
That's a great game. I completely agree. I recommend 1917. It was very good for all the reasons that we have said, and many that we probably haven't. So watch it for all those.
Exactly.
And it's
damn fine.
It just does a good job of portraying the shit without for the most part, without getting too maudlin or too sappy about it.
Yeah.
And I think that it does a good job with that. So I'm going to give it a 1.
Yeah, damn right. All right, so I'll give out the scores. Go down the line. Chris gave it a perfect 10. Steve-O, you gave it a 9, and Ian and I gave it 8s. Chris gave it a perfect score for the plot, and we split the difference on dialogue, giving us a 8.75 overall, I believe, if I've done the math correctly, which is quite strong. Yeah, it's up there. It's a worthy film to see, and I have no issues or problems with it being in the Oscar mix. And it deserves to be seen. Check it out. Any other final thoughts, boys?
No.
So I think we'll climb back into the trenches. Once more into the breach, my good friends. I have been Scott Thurlow, here with Chris Morgan.
Live long and prosper, peace and long life.
And Jonathan Ian Manzer.
Charge the Light Brigade.
And Stephen Amosi.
Watch out for tripwires.
And we'll see you next time.
Editing and engineering by Jonathan Ian Manzer. Music by Christopher Morgan. Check us out on YouTube and iTunes for the shows, and on Facebook and Twitter for updates. Or mods?